Yeah, so I am very excited to be here. I usually like to be very controversial when I do these things, but Charles, I have to disclose, is actually one of Vungle's first investors, so I have to be on my best behavior here, especially if I want to be here next year as CEO of Vungle, of course.
And I've had the pleasure of working with you for quite some time, man, so it's good to get a chance to catch up. And why don't we just jump in?
Yeah, this industry's changed since we've been working together. It's crazy. There was a time, and Charles, I got to hold you to account here, right?
Yeah.
You're asking me, what's the market size? Who's going to invest in this? And back then, the app revolution was just really kicking off 6-7 years ago.
Yeah, why don't you just talk about like what the app world looked like when you were starting Vungle?
It was messed up.
I know, it still is.
It still is for sure, yes. Well, I think if you look at user acquisition at the time, people were just so focused on getting the lowest cost per download. It made no sense to me. People used to just game the app charts, trying to get the lowest cost per download so they would climb the App Store rankings. And even customers of ours would ask us, what's your CPI? And I'd be like, what do you mean, what's our CPI? Think about ROI. Yeah. And I think the industry's evolved a lot since then, where now people think about ROI. And video ads, I remember, you obviously were a firm believer in Vungle, but a lot of people that didn't invest were like, why would you put a video ad in an app? That makes no sense. That sounds like such an intrusive experience. I'm like, exactly, that's why we should do it, because if we do it right, we can make it a natural part of the experience. So I think the industry's changed a lot over the last 6 years. Yeah. It was very hard for us to get off the ground. We recently announced a $300 million run rate, because we've now reached a scale where it seems like this is how monetization needs to work and will look.
Yeah. And what do you think has changed in the way your customers think about their own acquisition budgets, what they want to spend, where they want to spend, channels, what works? Like how's their thinking evolved over time?
Customers are way more sophisticated now. In the early days, there were questions around, how do I measure LTV? What attribution company do I use? Yeah. Which platform do I use? Today, the answer is simple, right? I mean, people generally use Facebook, Google, then when they saturate, they start to come to platforms like Vungle. But our customers have now moved beyond CPI. Yeah. In fact, our customers now actually send post-install data. So every time a consumer does something in their application, we get notified in real time. We're collecting about 1 billion events a day now. And this shows you how far the developer community, and especially when it comes to advertising, has realized data is the key asset. And how you use your data, that determines whether you stay in business or you don't, and you hit it big or you don't.
Did you have to convince was it a hard arm twist to get your customers to pass that data back to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about it.
How'd you
do it? The idea of sharing your lifetime value data with someone else is a crazy idea, and why would you do that usually? Yeah. And then when you do it, you realize, oh, all these ad platforms, so much ads, so little tech, they can't do anything with the data. Everyone claims to have AI and machine learning. Yeah, right. And I think once you prove you can do something with this data, then customers are much more willing to share it with you. But I think the industry is at a point now where only a few platforms are going to have access to that type of data. If you're a game developer, you do not want to be sending your LTV data to just everyone out there. You want to be very careful, and you want to make sure it's used correctly. Yeah.
And you mentioned Facebook and some of the other channels. How do you think about just the ecosystem you involve? I mean, before it was you and probably 8 or 10 other up-and-coming startup companies. I feel like the startup pool has dwindled, but so has the sort of third-party ad network universe. Both have sort of consolidated around a small number of names. How do you navigate a landscape like that?
Yeah. I mean, no surprise, Facebook makes up so much of the app install market, right? But in some ways, it's a blessing and a curse. In the ad industry, everyone is like, Facebook and Google, how are you going to compete with them? And now the Snap, previously it was Twitter. I actually think the good news, and I'm curious to hear your perspective as an investor in the space, right? We've seen a lot less entrants come into the space. And I think we're at a point now in the industry where once you have enough scale and enough technology, you really have created a special position for yourself in the market. I mean, most investors I've talked to are like terrified of investing in the ad industry. Yeah. You've invested in us, of course, but maybe you could speak for your, other investors out there in the ecosystem and how you've thought about the space too.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a part of 145 investments between SoftTech and Precursor. I have one.
In ads?
I have one company in ad tech.
Great job. That's good. That's good.
I think the challenge is, as an investor, I'm always looking for companies where I feel like there's a defensible advantage that the company can build over time. And in ad tech, there's so many three-letter acronyms, soup. And
Mob, app, blah, blah, blah.
SSP,
right?
all of these things. And I know more about this because of you than I ever wanted to. But the reality is a lot of these companies, it comes down to the real defensibility and moat around the business's scale. It's if you can get big enough that you're one of the few people who can fill really large orders, who has the data capability, who can make the investments in technology, that's where differentiation happens. And until you get to that point, a lot of the vendors kind of look and feel the same. And so as an investor, you look at it and say, gosh, how do I pick a winner? And how do I make sure I don't end up being one of the 10 companies that never achieve scale? And so it's kind of a scary area. You can look at other businesses like photo sharing or apps where you think, hey, that founder has a unique insight and maybe they can create network effects or some traction that helps them stand out. In advertising technology, it's been a lot more about the quality of the sales force, honestly, historically, than it's been about the quality of the technology. But I think that's shifted.
Yeah, I understand why people feel the way they do with ad tech. I mean, my God, I'm embarrassed to admit this, right? But at one point, I was so bullish. This is what I invested in.
Yeah.
Millennial Media.
Yep.
Rocket Fuel.
Yep.
Velti.
Yep.
Tremor. Yumi, list goes on.
Yeah.
Did not invest in TradeDesk or Criteo, unfortunately. Yep. I got burned myself on the public market, so I can understand why people are so skittish and afraid of this sector. But my view is, people have been not bitten, they've had their arms ripped off, for God's sakes, right? Especially me. I'm not allowed to invest anymore in public stocks. My wife won't let me, which is a good thing, actually. But these companies come from an era where it's about the web, where you have cookies, where typically you scale by hiring an army of salespeople. Yeah. And I think the app ecosystem is so different and so unique. And it's a shame like there hasn't yet been a huge multi-billion dollar market cap company in the space yet.
I mean, I think the other area we've seen tons of consolidation, it's probably relevant to folks in this room, is in almost every app category, you've seen a couple of behemoths kind of grow and take a disproportionate share of the top grossing or top, whatever chart you look at, there's just increased consolidation. And how do you think about that for Vungle's business, and what does it mean for smaller up-and-comers who are trying to figure out how to carve out a niche?
Unfortunately, nothing's changed since 2011. I was asking developers, what's your user acquisition strategy? Yeah. Getting featured by Apple. Yeah. That is not a marketing strategy, and unfortunately, app discovery still has not been solved. Yeah. Which is a real problem. My view, though, is that we are in such a sea change in terms of the revolution that's happening with new and upcoming apps. Yeah. You take any large Fortune 500 large media company, right? And you just see how they are not innovating in the space. And you're seeing brand new mobile-first companies come out and are completely taking away market share. And I guess as an investor in the space, that's exactly what you look for. But the Spotifys, the Snapchats, the Ubers, these companies came out with a completely clear value proposition that's mobile first. And their marketing strategy has gone far beyond getting featured by the App Store. They've become a natural part of our life as human beings.
And do you think there's still those opportunities that exist for folks? I mean, I look at the top growth.
More than ever, yes.
I just look at how many of those apps that Facebook owns, WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook. Yeah. Like, you just look at the top of the top head of that chart, and there's a few names that have really, whether it's in games or in major consumer apps, that have really aggregated a lot of eyeballs. So,
an interesting point, there will be consolidation for sure. Yeah. And if you look at the Asian world, right, you've got Tencent, for example, and the BATs, even SoftBank at one stage, who are just investing like crazy into this ecosystem and are creating such a huge platform. Yeah. Now, I think consolidation has its place, and here's my thesis at least, right? You want to empower developers to do what they do best, which is designing the world's best applications and writing the best code and doing the best design. Where I think consolidation can really help is unifying the stack when it comes to user acquisition, when it comes to monetization, when it comes to how you do analytics and segmentation. Yeah. And I think that's really the big opportunity. Now, of course, a Tencent would have a different view, and they would say, we can take any game from the West and make it massive in Asia and have such huge economics. And I'm actually surprised Facebook and others haven't taken that approach, but I understand why. They did things with the content media world too, which annoyed a lot of people.
You spent a lot of time on Vungle's behalf in Asia. Yes. Growing the business, talking to people. What are some of the lessons you've learned that you've brought back here to the States, and what are some things you have some reservations about whether they might work here?
Yeah, we made a lot of mistakes in Asia, and now Asia's a third of our revenue.
Yeah, we should talk about some of those.
Yeah, we're in Singapore, Japan, China, and Korea, and we were very, very early going into the China market. And actually, what surprised me, I'm British. My parents are immigrants from Uganda, right? So I'm not your typical like Silicon Valley tech person, not at all. And when I came to the Valley, you may remember saying. I know VCs, because frankly, VCs have LPs, they have geographic focuses. I made it very clear from the beginning, we're going to be a global company from day one. And my wife is French, by the way. My kids, they look hilarious. They've got 3 passports, by the way. Indian origin, French, it's an interesting mix. The DNA needs to be global from day one. And we had to make it very clear to investors, and many investors also push back, like, why would you go to China? Like, you're going to fail there.
And how long were you on the ground in China before the engine and the flywheel really started to work there? What was that investment like?
Years and years we were in China. I mean, I even started, learning a bit of Chinese myself, because you really need to, understand the culture and region. And also, I've got this joke internally: if you can make it to the second largest, revenue generator country, I'll learn the language. That's right. I'm highly incentivized to do that, then, right? But we were in China for a couple of years, and I realized you can't just treat China like any other market. And so we decided at that point, we need to invest in technology in China. It's not good enough to hire a bunch of salespeople, a bunch of marketing folks. So this isn't known, so it's funny I'm saying this now publicly, but when Zynga China shut down, we actually essentially hired their technology team. And that was a bold move. We just signed off on our annual plan, and I called our board up, and I was like, hey guys, I know we just got budget for the next year. I'm going to rip it apart, and I need to spend like millions of dollars hiring a bunch of engineers. But that's the level of commitment you need to have if you're going to.
And why did you feel so strongly that you needed a local team that had been sort of in market already?
You could barely deliver video ads in the Great Firewall of China, firstly. That's why, right? But I think you need to. I also realize that China's market is so big, so much opportunity. You have to build for the local ecosystem. The funny thing is, we haven't achieved that at all. Most of our revenue in China, like 99% of it, still comes from iOS. So it's interesting to think, because my view on China was, this is going to be a mass market play where the ARPDAU per user is going to be tiny, but we're going to make it up in volume. I'm shocked, actually. The revenue we make per device in places like China is sometimes on par or beats what we see here in the US and Europe. But that's because of the iOS market.
And do you think does that feel like a stable, steady state, or are you seeing evidence that that's migrating more towards your original thesis?
We have to be able to connect and partner with the local ecosystem, because Android is so heavily fragmented. The most common question I get from game developer customers is, how do I go to China? And that question hasn't changed for the last 6 years. Hasn't changed. And I think the right approach perhaps is finding the right investor and finding the right type of publisher. What's your geographic focus when you're investing?
I do United States and Canada.
Why? Because of LPs, or?
These are markets I feel like I can understand.
Fair enough.
That's really all it comes down to.
Now, anyone that pretends to know, even I don't know anything about China, to be honest. Anyone that pretends to know anything about like Asian markets, if they're not from there, not born there, and haven't actually bled and sweat and cried, like, is China rubbish.
Yeah, every time I go spend time with the guys at GGV, or I spend time with the folks from Matrix China, I realize the knowledge gap for me as someone who's based here and grew up here, it's too big.
Don't you feel like you're going to miss out on those massive opportunities? I mean, why not even Europe?
It's interesting. Like, I've looked at quite a few European companies. It's scaling and building talent. It's just harder. I mean, why don't you talk about?
It's hard to build talent here, man. In San Francisco, Silicon Valley, it's tough.
This is really true.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about sort of how, as you've looked at Asia, China's its own thing. What have you learned about Japan and Korea? Because those were pretty mature markets, at least people think about as having maybe more analogous behavior to the United States.
Yeah, the revenue per user is off the roof. I mean, it's insane when it comes to Japan and Korea. I think our general thesis was that we're going to go to Japan, we're going to go to Korea, and we're going to build up a local platform where you have Korean advertisers advertising in Korean apps. I'm so wrong. Yeah. In fact, I'm so shocked at the fact that most of our revenue, at least in the early days, came from Korean companies, Japanese companies that wanted to actually do user acquisition in the Western markets. And I guess this is the beauty of the app ecosystem. You could be in Berkeley, right? And you could be building your own app, and before you know it, 50% of your users are in Mexico, and the other 40% are in some Asian market. That's how beautiful this ecosystem is. Yeah. You build this wonderful app, you somehow figure out distribution, and before you know it, you've got a global user base.
Yeah. And I mean, you've talked a lot about Europe and what about sort of the other two big regions of the world, Latin America and Africa. Is there any demonstrable, meaningful revenue opportunity for you there? Or tell me more about your thinking on this.
I think so. There's a bunch of like complicated legal and tax challenges
Yeah.
to scaling in the Latin markets, but I actually am very bullish on India.
Uh-huh.
Well, like India has to be a market that is going to be so big, and I look at when we went to China, the infrastructure just wasn't there at the time. And the same feelings around, or the same vibe that existed when people told me not to go to China, I'm now hearing about India. And usually, I'm an entrepreneur, so I don't listen to people very well. I'm unemployable, I think. But my sort of benchmark for making decisions was when enough people tell you it's a stupid, crazy idea, go do that. Like that is the best thing to do. So I'm actually bullish on the Indian markets, and we've started to hire people in Singapore to sort of, put a presence in that region too.
And do you feel like it's going to look more like the China playbook, where you feel like you need to get a local in-market team, or is it something you can parachute in some of the Vunglers that are steeped in the culture and understand the business and product, or like, do you need a local partner? How do you think about market entry in such a big country?
Yeah, we even looked at acquisitions in the past too.
Yeah.
I honestly do not know. We have tried so many different things in each market, right? One approach was you hire a couple of people on the ground, you send people back and forth. The other approach is you hire like 10 people in one go, which is a mistake, by the way.
Yeah.
Don't like overinvest into a market. Make sure you do it steady. I think we're taking the approach probably of the first one, where you use Singapore to sort of bridge into India, and then one interesting, like not scientific at all, right? But I've been looking at the App Store charts for a long time, and I look at the Indian, App Store rankings, and I used to see there's just a lot of Western content that's in the top ranking charts. And when that started to change, and you start to see more local apps in the top ranking, apps for India, for example, that's when you know, okay, now is the time when actually content's being localized and you can move ahead aggressively.
And I mean, I think you serve a ton of game developers, and you have other non-games customers as well at Vungle. And what lessons do you think those app developers have learned from the success of games? Because games have done so well in the App Store.
It's crazy. I'm seeing so many non-gaming apps, to use that word, hiring talent from the gaming applications. When it comes to user acquisition, for example, the KPIs are going to be different. It might not be 7-day ROAS. It might be CPA or CPE or whatever it may be. But I'm seeing talent flow from gaming to non-gaming. I'm starting to see vendors that we work with on the attribution analytics side getting adopted by these certain companies. I'm seeing brand customers, brand apps who are starting to actually share their LTV data with platforms like Vungle. So I'm seeing a lot of change. What I think is probably the most exciting opportunity out there is this. You look at the App Store revenues, most of it is gaming, and it has been that way. And it's crazy to think how we make money as a company. I was just, chairing a roundtable discussion a few moments ago, and I was saying, we show an ad inside of one game for another game. We're promoting a game. How do we make money? We make money when the consumer looks at that game, downloads it, and spends money. What do they spend money on? A random coin, a random like fake car or a tank. And that is driving an industry worth tens of billions of dollars. We have not even started to tap into the actual needs consumers have. We make money just on these, virtual reality items, right? If you can start to tap into the need to buy flowers for your wife, which damn, I need to do more of, or we're in Berkeley right now. How the hell am I going to get to San Francisco? Well, there you go, ride-sharing apps. Well, I'm hungry. I did not get to have lunch because I was doing the roundtable discussion, right? Food delivery. This is where the future of the ecosystem is heading, and I'm so excited.
And I guess last question on that front. I mean, you've talked a little bit about the tech stack. I think if you're a big company, integrating 7 or 8 different vendors or finding ways to make that all work is something that's in your purview. But for smaller developers, is that a sustainable ecosystem to have this many different providers in the stack between sort of install and data?
Yeah, well, Machines that works with like 300 plus partners and works with them, all on a one-on-one basis, right? Now, our view is there has to be consolidation for sure. The ad industry needs consolidation, but as a developer, why would you want to work with hundreds and hundreds of vendors? That's going to drive you nuts and insane. So yeah, I fundamentally believe there will be consolidation, and there has to be for sure,
Cool.
Great. I got one last question for you as we've got a little bit of time. I get asked by a lot of people, VR. What's your take on VR? I have my view, but what's your view on VR as an investor?
I would put myself in the deeply skeptical category. I've made one VR investment, and the one that I've made is more enterprise-oriented. just because I think, I don't know, my basic thesis on hardware is consumers buy hardware for what they can do today. No one buys a new console system for a game that's coming out in a year. You buy it so that you can go home and play that game today. And I think when I look at the price point it's funny, I have a Daydream and I have a Vive. I actually use my Daydream a lot more because it's easier to set up and it's lightweight and I don't need as much infrastructure. And so I think we don't yet have, and cardboard, whatever you want to say, I don't think the trial experience for the average consumer who's somewhat interested but maybe skeptical of dropping a lot of money in a VR headset, like that world doesn't exist today. And I think until I have more confidence that the use case or the desire for VR headsets and equipment and that experience is greater, it's hard for me to be overly enthusiastic about the content experience side, even though it is so amazing when you try it. So.
Yeah, my last comment. I agree, the infrastructure needs to be there. The the little child in me, right, which is probably the spirit that many entrepreneurs have here when they build their company. It just seems so cool.
It is so cool.
The idea of like a Minority Report style world where you can interact with things in a hologram way or immerse with it, but the users are not there.
That's right.
I do think, and I hope like it will be there. But I just remember I've got 2 kids, and it's crazy. You see them and they know how to unlock my phone. They go up to the freaking window and start swiping it. Right? They expect interactivity. Yeah. It's not you and I, it's not the audience in this room, it's our kids who are going to look at the world and challenge the status quo and say, why do we have really non-visual, non-interactive environments around us? Why don't we change that? And that's when there'll be a huge change in the infrastructure side. Yeah. So I still think it's probably at least 5 or 10 years out.
That feels about right. Yeah. Hopefully a little sooner for everyone in this room, but that doesn't seem unreasonable.
Great, awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, Charles.
Good seeing you, man. Thanks so much.